Hey everyone, today we're doing a new series where we assess the strength of killers and pit them against one another to try and deduce who would win in a 1v1 fight. We're going to do this by assigning each of the killers a number score, with 6 categories: strength, agility, stealth, power, resistance, and intelligence. Strength is an assessment of the killer's physical strength. Agility is an assessment of how quickly they can move and strike their weapon. Stealth is how stealthy they are. Power is how effective or strong their power is. Resistance is their ability to resist incoming direct attacks. And intelligence is an assessment of how smart they are or are not. With these scores and my own reasoning for each of the numbers, we will decide who I think would likely win in a 1v1 fight. I'm going to try and be as objective as possible and be without any bias. Today we're going to try and work out who would win in a 1v1, the Trapper or the Wraith. Let's begin by looking at strength, our first category. Let's start with Trapper first, mostly because the strength category is one that is quite easy to decide upon for Trapper. In my opinion, I think it's quite clear that Trapper is quite strong physically. We can dictate this based on 2 of his perks: Brutal Strength, a perk that allows him to break faster, and finally Agitation, which allows him to carry faster. These are both actions that require a certain level of physicality and strength. Trapper also has this increase over other killers. Despite having metal entangled within his body, he still remains incredibly strong physically. For those reasons, we are going to assign Trapper with a perfect score of 10, so a very strong start for him. Now, Wraith, although a similar height, does not appear to be as physically strong. He is more athletically built, a lot leaner but also a lot less bulky, meaning he may be fit or healthy, but not necessarily crazily strong. None of Wraith's perks indicate a significant amount of strength either. However, due to the fact that he is tall and looks relatively strong, we're going to place his strength at a mid-tier of 5. He may not be able to get the sheer power that Trapper has, but he could certainly hold his own. Okay, agility next. Trapper has a regular movement speed of 4.6 meters per second, which makes him average in terms of his ability to move about. However, Trapper does lose some points here despite being average, as he's quite physically slow and lumbering in his movement and the way he utilizes his weaponry. When placing traps without add-ons, he's quite slow and he has to bend down quite awkwardly. Trapper's clothing is also fairly heavy depending on what he wears, his typical getup being a rubber apron, a skull mask, and a heavy cleaver, as well as carrying his traps. So he's not exactly mobile. We should also note that he has metal piercing his body, likely making his movement stiffer and painful. For these reasons, Trapper's agility I am placing at 2. In a fight, it's going to be hard for him to move about freely. Now, Wraith is quite the opposite of Trapper. Although he does have the same average movement speed of 4.6 meters per second, this goes up to 5.04 meters per second without add-ons when cloaked, which is a considerable increase of speed. Wraith is also quite agile, as we discussed before, as he has much more of an athletic build than Trapper, and one which makes him lighter on his feet, as well as quicker. Wraith's clothing is also very light quite broadly. He wears thin clothing and cloaks and carries probably a fairly light weapon, and of course his bell. He also isn't restricted by any bodily injuries, so we can assume Wraith overall is very agile. Despite this, however, Wraith won't quite score a perfect 10, as his base movement speed is still only average when uncloaked. So for agility, Wraith gets an 8. So this brings the overall scores to 12 points for Trapper and 13 points for Wraith so far. Okay, so for stealth. Trapper, although being lumbering and heavy, is actually quite stealthy. Trapper's whole premise is that he kind of sneaks away and sets up traps in a somewhat stealthy and elusive way, so that when the survivors reach an area, then they step in his traps. Trapper is also quite sneaky if you watch the cutscenes. He manages to be unseen, and then when you step in his trap, he comes for you. His traps once again are also a part of his stealth, with them being hidden well. He is a master trapper at the end of the day, not just a slasher. He's hunted loads of different animals, even as big as bears. His downfall mainly is that his stealth isn't directly applicable when he is facing off, or chasing you really. So Trapper gets a 6. Wraith has quite a straightforward answer, seeing as he can literally be invisible, and so his stealth is quite clearly going to be very high in its potential. From his agility as well, we can assume that Wraith is a very effective stealth hunter, also based on his perks, and so his stealth would be good in a fight. However, Wraith's only downfall is his bell. Due to his bell needing to be rung before uncloaking, he gets a bit of a decrease from a perfect score, so I'm putting Wraith at a 9 for stealth. Next up we have the power category, which is one where we look at the 2 killers' powers. So Trapper's power is fairly simple. He has bear traps. There's nothing supernatural or anything really about him. He's just really good at hunting and trapping his prey. He's also strong at creating perimeters and tricking others into his traps. I don't think there's too much to say about Trapper's power, so we're giving it a 3. Now remember, this is just a score of the power only, and not the killer's skill with their power. Just what the power actually is. Wraith is quite strong in terms of his power of cloaking. his power lets him go very nearly invisible upon ringing his bell twice. This is a factor that needs to be considered, however, and also the fact that his invisibility does not make him completely invisible, just partially. To someone like Trapper, an expert hunter, he would likely see him coming some of the time, so although Wraith has a very strong power, due to its downsides, he gets a score of 6. Okay, next up, resistance. Right off, I think it's pretty clear to see that Trapper is quite heavily resistant to incoming damage, in the form of the metal twisted through him, the huge claw and gash marks over him, and also the fact that he is relatively unfazed and can repeatedly step in his own traps and be mostly uninjured. Trapper seems to have thick skin basically, as well as wearing a rubber apron and a bone mask. He is going to be very resistant, I think, to attacks, even if they are from sharp objects. So, Trapper gets a 9. Wraith is a different story. Despite his tall stature and relative strength, there is nothing to suggest that he would be able to resist a hard blow from Trapper, if Trapper managed to land a swing. Due to his lack of armor, and the fact that he doesn't seem to have thicker skin or resistance in any way, Wraith is going to score below average at 3. This makes the scores fairly close, with Wraith leading on 31 points, and Trapper close behind with 30. Okay, so intelligence. Trapper is not that intelligent. He doesn't seem to be that intelligent, at least. There's also suggestions lore-wise that he isn't overly academic or anything like that. He is also blinded by his loyalties to his father, which makes him miss the obvious fact that his father killed his mother and uncle, and he doesn't find out for years. However, the Trapper is intelligent in one regard, which is, well, traps. He is a very good hunter in a sort of specialized way. So this does bring his score up. Despite him being an effective hunter, however, he is still below average for intelligence, and so we place him at a 4. That brings Trapper's overall to 34. Wraith also doesn't seem that bright, given the fact that he has a similar ignorance like Trapper does to his father, except with his boss and the cars he was crushing at Auto Heaven Wreckers. Also, Wraith rings a bell when he comes out of stealth. That seems like a bit of an oversight when you're trying to be stealthy. So, I'm sorry to say it, but Wraith is getting put at 2, bringing his overall to 33. Meaning Trapper wins by 1 point. Now, my overall opinion on if these two fought is that it would be very close. One is stealthy and a hunter, and so is the other to an extent. But they vary with agility, power, all these things, meaning overall I think it would be very even, with it being a scenario where if they were to fight 100 times, then Trapper would win 51 and Wraith 49. That's my assessment. Alright, well, thanks for watching. Be sure to drop your own scores below and tell me who you think would win. Thanks, and goodbye.